So here we are with America's favourite conversation of the moment, abortions, and America's favourite conversation from olden times, federalism. So here we talk today about the convoluted nature of the Supreme Court having to adjudicate over the Biden administration saying federal law comes first, and Idaho saying no, state law comes first. In a case that clashes with emergency room doctors, healthcare in Idaho, and will raise wider issues when it comes to healthcare and abortion across America. This story is from The Guardian by Katie Sherman from the 23rd of April 2024 and discusses the Idaho law restricting abortions and the federal law requiring emergency room medical care. So, Emma, you're a fiery person when it comes to talking about issues like this. How fiery do you find this issue?
You've started on the person with no understanding of US law. So my understanding of this particular issue is more, less based in the law, because I don't know what the difference between federal and state law is. Someone else can deal with that later. Thank you, and please. I just read this news with this sort of an air of despair, especially because every article like this that talks about abortion law has a doctor sort of crying and lamenting the disastrous state of affairs, and I think
it's family Dr. Ben when you need him
to bring a bit of a smile. I'm starting to feel a bit religious dystopia about it. This is like coming.
I feel that every day.
Well, but it increases with every article on abortion, right? This is following Italy and now allowing anti-abortion activists inside its clinics, its abortion clinics. And it's one of those situations where you have the experts, who are the doctors and specialists, saying this is bad and or fleeing the state or considering fleeing the state. And then the US saying, well, there's people's lives and there's people's health, but uneducated Christian activism is more important than the medical expertise. And I'm like, I don't get it. I don't understand how this is allowed to be a thing. Perhaps somebody with a better understanding of the legal aspect of this, perhaps one of our American friends can help me out.
Helen, you know the law backwards, don't you? You know all about this.
I am such a legal scholar in American law, but basically it is that there's a federal precedent that is set. And when that federal precedent is set, usually the states have to follow it. They can set their own laws, but the federal law comes first. And basically, Idaho was like, no, we're not going to do that. And
we're going to start shouting 10th Amendment here, aren't we? We're going to start shouting 10th Amendment.
It's a fucking problem. So
we're going to start shouting enumerated powers and unenumerated rights and all this stuff.
Right. And that was a problem with, Thorne Schickman saying that it's going to go back to the states, because that's what happens, is that he kept saying it's going to be, and because it's such a contentious issue, and that the Christian nationalists are basically saying that, no, we want the states to decide. But the thing is, though, they're woefully uneducated in healthcare and science. They just want to do whatever their sky daddy tells them to do. This is leading to people's lives being at risk, because also, like, a problem with this is a complete lack of understanding of women's health, what pregnancy does to the body, why women get abortions in the first place, what actually happens when someone gets an abortion. They just have this immaculate sort of peripheral idea that it's like, oh, like.
Have they immaculately conceived this issue?
What?
Have they immaculately conceived this issue?
Yeah, basically, that's basically what happened. Because, if you look at his, I understand. I'm a mom. I like babies, but there's a big difference between a zygote and then, an actual human baby. But somehow they conflate the two, and then they're like, well, I think that it's the same thing. And it's like, no, motherfucker, it's not the same thing. Let me explain to you why it's not.
You say that, but I remember recently on this show, we did a case that you can find the card up here for, where we discussed in vitro fertilization.
I know.
Were those children? Were those, right to life? And I mean, this is where it goes when we talk about these. How far down the path do we go with what is and is not protected by these laws? In Alabama, it was an embryo frozen in a tube that could or could not be implanted. In Idaho, it's 6 weeks, and it's a smorgasbord of strangeness. And it just feels very odd. And
it's not even got, the thing is, it's not got it's rooted in Christian nationalism. It's not got a good biblical precedent. If you're looking for opinions on abortion in the Bible, you'll find more pro-abortion related stuff than you will. So they make all these arbitrary rules, but there's not even a good religious basis for it, and somehow that's okay with everyone.
And it's just very, very odd. And I mean, I've spoken to Infidel and Helen about coming from a Jewish background, and I mean, there are people who are Jewish who are challenging these laws, saying it impinges my religious freedom to prevent me getting an abortion. And I mean, Infidel, you're the only person who identifies as a man on this panel. How do you feel when you see an article like this, as somebody who identifies as a man seeing this?
I have to say that the first thing that I think is that with this being a law dating back to 1849, and we had our recent fiasco in Arizona where their state Supreme Court brought up a bill that predated the state's existence. What we're seeing is, so many times I remember reading books as a kid and growing up and reading about different people, and it's like their first wife or their second wife died during childbirth. And I almost feel like that we're getting back to a full circle of where these Christian nationalists really do view women as being expendable. As long as they're able to do the things that they want, they don't care, because ultimately they want control. Because this is just the beginning. If we think that this is going to stop at abortion rights, this is going to go to birth control. This is going to go to a whole lot of other medical decisions. And why? Well, if there's one thing that a good Christian has always been able to do, is to tell you what you needed to do. And so this is just another example, time and again, of and not necessarily following it, because I'm sure there's plenty of them that are willing to fly to other states, wherever they need to go to do what they want to do. But they are more than happy to tell you what you need to do, who you need to like, who you need to dislike, and where you need to fly on this issue. Because once prior to 2023, they took one woman out of the state for maternal complications. Now they're doing it roughly every other week in Idaho. So this is having very real ramifications of people who are able to get health care, who instead of getting it are getting shipped off to other states and their lives being endangered. For what? For power.
And I mean, you raise a good point there when you bring up contraception. I mean, the case of Griswold v. Connecticut, that's not codified in federal law. That is just Supreme Court precedent. In the same way Roe versus Wade was just Supreme Court precedent that said that you had the right to access abortion, Griswold v. Connecticut, which says you have the right to access contraception and you have a right to privacy in your own bedroom, is just Supreme Court precedent. So you have to remember that you had the Supreme Court here, the activist five, and I do love how Republicans used to rally against activist liberal judges, and then they get their activist five who start doing all the activism on the court, who say that there is no right to follow stare decisis. There is no right to follow precedent. There is no decision being made on the facts of the case in front of them. It's all about, I want this to happen. I want this to be the case. It's legislating from the bench here. This case is an odd case for the Supreme Court. It's entirely of their own making, but they are the arbiters, as they should be, of what the law is and not what the law that they want it to be. The court here should be arbitrating between states and the federal government what the law is. It should not be deciding what they want the law to be. They need to be deciding what the law is as passed by the relevant Congress or as enshrined in the relevant section of the Constitution. When it came to Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health, that was quite clearly, before a single word had been written on a piece of paper, the case was going to rule that way. You knew that it was going to be that way. The only thing was it going to be 5-4 or 6-3? That was the only sticking point. Was John Roberts going to join the rest of the conservative wing of the bench, or was he going to go, hang on a minute, let's not? Ultimately, he joined the 3 liberals on the court and went, hang on, we can't do this. But it didn't matter. The case before them didn't matter on the facts. The case was a vessel, and it was a method of getting what they wanted through. And I think that that's what is most disturbing here. We could talk about this all day long, but it doesn't matter if the 5 people who make the decision here pay us no attention whatsoever when we bring a case. And that's the most disturbing thing about what the court did in Dobbs. It decided that it was going to have the outcomes regardless of what was before it. And now you have cases coming before it which are junk. Mifepristone case, it was junk. It was one of the worst argued cases I have ever had the misfortune of listening through in my entire life, where basically 6 doctors said, I don't want this, therefore no one must. I mean, if I said that every time I went around doing things, Emma, Infidel, and Helen wouldn't get a look in each way out at Tuesday. But, Helen, you've heard me talk about these things before. Mm-hmm. You've heard me give my opinion to you on these legal things. What's your take when it comes to seeing where the interactions between the federal law and the state law is going, particularly on reproductive rights in this case?
I am deeply concerned because we had decided back in the 1970s that the state could no longer, one, with the privacy law, which is fucking very disturbing where that's going. And also as well was basically like a person has a right to privacy and their ability to access healthcare. And now the state is coming going, no, you don't get to have that right anymore. Like, we're going to decide what is better for you. Now, and basically what this says is that if, for example, like, I've heard this also from Republican pundits, which drives me crazy, that like if a state is blue or more liberal or has abortion legal in their states, like, oh, a woman can just go to that state and have an abortion. Okay, well, that costs money and time, and this is discriminatory, and this shows the racism and the sexism of this particular law when it comes down to the state, because a lot of people cannot access the money and funds to move to another state for that state to perform an abortion. And that's a problem. And the reason why it's a fucking problem is because this tends to target poor people that don't have access to healthcare, don't have access. Like, if you make, like, let's say you have to take 3 days off and you don't know if you're going to have complications from having the procedure, you're going to lose time at work. So that's lost income.
I heard something on that.
And it leads into, but let me finish my thought real fast. Like, and that leads into another issue of this is not so much about, like, we're trying to preserve life. This is like, we're trying to control your body and make sure that you're going to be a broodmare. It has nothing to do caring about women's health, what they need to make sure, like, even if they were going to have a pregnancy, to make sure that they have access to the health care to make sure that pregnancy comes to fruition, that the baby is healthy, and the person has access to the resources they will need after the baby is born. They are pro-birth and they're not about pro-life. And that's the reason why this is such a problem when we're talking about the state rights. Because basically, if you're still stuck in the state that you're living in, even if you, like, let's say you go to California and, you know, you get an abortion, but you live in another state where it's not, you have to go back to that state. That doesn't mean that you're going to get access to the care that you need, where you might get it in another state that you do need it for. And that's where this gets really, like, gets very dicey, and it's not as simple as people want to think it is. That's my problem.
I saw a map the other day, because now Florida's got a 6-week abortion ban in force. Some people, the closest states they can go to, some parts in the country, it's Michigan, Illinois, and New Mexico in some parts of America. I mean, I always firmly believe that in America you have the right to travel. This feels like you're being forced to travel. And I wanted to pick up something that is picked up on here when it comes to reproductive rights. And I wanted to ask Infidel here, do you think that there will ever be a restriction on male reproductive rights in the same way that there will be on female reproductive rights? So do you think that states could go after vasectomies, for example?
Well, I will use a shirt. I hate to narrow down my politics to it, what's on a T-shirt, but Ray has a shirt that says "Regulate your dick." That's her response to the whole abortion issue. And well, with that in mind, no, not at all. It'll take a complete upside down twist before we start talking about male responsibility, even in the close to the same breath, even though we're talking about a relatively minor procedure. No, that's not going to happen. One other thing I wanted to say real quick was you mentioned it's not as easy as going from one state to another, Helen. I believe you may have been on the panel when we covered the 12-year-old girl who in Mississippi who was raped, had the baby at 13, and because her mother literally was on the support system and unable to afford to go to Tennessee, where at that point it was legal, which I don't think it is now. And Emma, I was just wondering what you might have to say about this.
I mean, it's just patently disgusting. I think it's kind of funny as well, and something that is funny, quote unquote.
Not ha funny.
Not ha funny, but kind of funny. That you don't even have to go to like discussing male reproductive like health options to see the hypocrisy, because there's a long list of Republican anti-abortion activists who have paid for their mistresses, ex-wives, etc. to have abortions. It's not even about
just great, isn't it?
I do have a question. So what is
feel selfish?
Like, I am curious, like, what is the, like, in England, what is the law regarding abortion? Is it easy access? Is there any restrictions on it? Like,
opinion of 2 doctors.
Okay.
So if you can get the opinion of 2 doctors, and it's up to 24 weeks.
Wow.
The UK is quite strange when it comes to that, because if you're past 24 weeks and you give birth to a non-viable birth, then you have what's known in law as a stillbirth, and you have to legally register that in the same way you would have registered a live birth. So Britain is very odd when it comes to
a strange one.
Yeah,
that's weird.
So Britain's abortion laws go back to the 1960s, and they've very rarely been updated, and it's just not something, and I think Emma would agree with me here, you don't really see abortion really shouted about in politics in Britain. I mean, David Cameron kind of brought it up on a free vote, and everyone just went, okay, we've done that, and kind of moved on. Would you agree there?
Yeah, it's just not really a massive discussion here. I don't know. It just doesn't. But then I worry, because we frequently seem to take our our cues over the last like 10 years from US culture, and the arguments seem to bleed over here. So
please don't.
I'd love it to maintain, not being an issue, but I fear even talking about it might jinx it.
Yes, and if you want to talk more about this issue, you can find out how to talk more on the Nonprofits Facebook page.